Good morning, everybody. Okay, so I'm a project management nerd. That's been established. Those of you who manage projects or actually are humans interacting with other people will find that negotiation is a very interesting and useful set of skills. Project managers are constantly negotiating with vendors and sponsors and team members and stakeholders. And the bottom line is, if you are a skilled negotiator, you're more likely to get what you want, and you're less likely to be taken advantage of by other negotiators. And so effective negotiation skills has a huge ROI. And what I want to talk about today is negotiation, and I want to establish a context, okay? So when we talk about a gambit, we're talking about an action or a strategy that usually entails some risk, and we engage in it because we're hoping to get some perceived advantage. So most of you are probably familiar with the term gambit from chess, right? Where it looks like a sacrifice, but it gives you some competitive advantage. What I want to do is talk with you about negotiation and about the rules or lack of rules of the game. But first, let's get some context. How many of you are card players or computer gamers? Right? Play poker maybe, or gin. Any of you guys play games like that? Good card players want to play, do the best they can to play their cards to maximize their winnings, right? A good poker player knows that they're not going to win every hand, so they want to negotiate. They want to get rid of bad hands, and they want to maximize the value they get from good hands. I've been a gamer for over 50 years. Ferocious player of strategy games. I love to win. I'm pretty good. And I want to give you my secret. The secret of my success is my grandmother. That is one of the only pictures I have of my grandmother and I. I'm about 7, she's about 60. And my grandmother was a tough old lady. Her first husband was a jewel thief. And when he went to prison, she married my grandfather as a consolation prize. I was her first and favorite grandson, and she lived with us off and on when I was a kid. She taught me to play rummy and canasta, a couple of card games. When I was so little, I could hardly hold the cards. And I'm assuming that she was gentle with me for the first few sessions, but she kicked my butt for years. She taught me strategy through the School of Hard Knocks. You know, by the time I was 7 or 8, she would kick my butt and then point out to me what information I had given her, how I'd misplayed, and how I could do better. And I've been a gamer ever since. Love games of strategy. I've passed that passion along to my kids, and now I'm passing it along to my grandchildren. And, you know, for little kids, yeah, you throw a game to them. But once they're 7 or 8, no slack. No slack at all. I try to play games that have enough randomness that anybody can win occasionally, and enough strategy that kids can see an improvement as they start coming up with different ideas. They can actually see how they can influence outcomes. Our family is really fussy about rules. Our family is really fussy about rules. We make care that the rules are understood. We care that the rules are followed. We play viciously, but we're not sore losers. There's no cheating. Okay, here's the family rules. Right? No slack for anybody other than little bitty kids. Play hard, have fun. No one follow the rules. No sore losers, no cheating. There is an exception to the no cheating rule. If you're playing War or Candyland with a 4-year-old, cheating is allowed. Basically, what you want to do is put the really good cards on the top, or put them on the bottom so that you can deal them to the kids and get the game to end. But other than that, no, we want to play hard. No slack. All right, so wait a minute, push the wrong button. There we go. So let's talk about negotiation. Negotiation is a process for seeking acceptable terms to exchange something that's desired by somebody else for something you want. Maybe you're exchanging money for a used car. That's a negotiation. But let's focus on the word process, okay? Let's focus on the word process. We can loosely define this as a series of proposals and counteroffers. That's the process. I make a proposal, you make a proposal back, and what we're doing is we're hunting for some terms that are acceptable to both of us. And how would we know that a negotiation was successful? Think about that for a minute. What would a successful negotiation look like? One way that we could decide is, did we reach agreement? Did we reach agreement? I don't think that's sufficient. I don't think that's sufficient. Think for a moment, what does successful negotiation mean for you? What's successful negotiation mean for you? Because if we say agreement was reached, then this is a successful negotiation, right? Well, this is absolutely a negotiation, right? Your money or your life. And apparently we have reached terms. The mugger is getting the money, and we hope that the victim is keeping their life. But I don't know if the victim would think that this was a successful negotiation. This leads to an important philosophical question that we really have to deal with, okay? Here's the question. How do you evaluate negotiation outcome? This turns out to be really kind of pivotal to what I want to talk about here. Now, on the one hand, on one extreme, we could say that, look, a successful negotiation is when we have a win-win. Both parties feel like they got something of value for something of value, and we think it was a fair exchange. Okay, that's one extreme. The other extreme would be maximizing personal value. Maximizing personal value. And so let's talk about the win-win. If we want to talk about win-win, I've got some good references for you. These are on a slide at the end, but there's a couple of books. One's called Getting to Yes, and the other's called The New Negotiating Edge. And these are books published in the last 20 years or so, I think, maybe 20, 30 years, that really talk about what's called ethical negotiation, where the idea is to not take advantage of someone, to try to find an equitable exchange. That's not the only way to do negotiation, right? If you get an older negotiating book, you get a book that's used to train salespeople, you get a book that's more than about 40 years old. Couple of examples is The Negotiating Game by Karras, or The Art of the Deal. What they'll tell you is there are no rules. And it's okay to lie, it's okay to cheat, it's okay to misrepresent the facts, it's okay to use a bunch of different gambits to put a person on the other side of the table off balance and take as best advantage of them as you can. For these folks, negotiating is a game. It's a game that has no rules. The outcome is the goal is to maximize your personal benefit, okay? I'd also like to point out an honorable mention in the middle. There's a really good book that was written about maybe 10 years ago called Never Split the Difference. It was written by a hostage negotiator. I think I strongly recommend you Getting to Yes, The New Negotiating Edge on your bookshelf. Never Split the Difference is a great one. And the negotiating game will give you some insights into some of the what I think of as unethical practices that some people engage in. And that's why I wanted to do this little bit of a preamble. I am not advocating the gambits that I'm about to share. They're common, they're described in a lot of books. I didn't invent these. I'm not advocating their use. Some of them you may think of as unethical or dishonest. I do. There's some of these that I think would be improper and inappropriate. And I'm not trying to say, hey, here's how to go take advantage of people. What I really want to do is prime you so that no one takes advantage of you. I want to give you tactics. I want to explain these so that you recognize this when someone is trying to do this to you. In fact, as we go through this, you're going to recognize some of these gambits. And I want to give you strategies to counter them and some ways to think about negotiation. You may find some of these tactics useful in some contexts. Some of these gambits are useful in some contexts, but it's really important to understand they can be relationship destroying. And I think that's a real important idea. If we look, let's talk about two extreme circumstances in negotiating. On the left, you see a one-off transaction. You meet a stranger in a town far away, and you're going to buy a used car from them, and you're never going to see them again. And on the right, we have a transaction with maybe a business partner or a friend or a neighbor, and we're going to engage in this transaction. We're going to see them again tomorrow. And the important thing to think about is that relationship risk, or the improvement or damage to a relationship, is absolutely a part of any negotiation. And that's why I'm a huge fan of trying to negotiate in good faith, because I really want to preserve those relationships. But recognize these are two very different contexts. So what I want to do now is move in. We're going to talk about this, and the format is I'm going to explain the gambit. You're probably going to recognize it. You've probably had all of these things done to you at some point. And then I want to talk about possible counters. So let's begin our tour of 8 negotiating gambits. Think about the last time that you bought a car. The last time you bought a car, did you experience something like this? You chat with the nice salesman, you come in, you understand pretty much what you want, you chat with them, you think you got a deal, and then you hear, okay, just need to run this by my manager. And what happens is the manager comes back and says, he throws this guy under the bus, and he says, no, that's not going to work. You don't understand the MSRP or whatever. Wants to wave the invoice at you, and he wants to take where you thought you concluded the negotiation as a starting point for continuing the negotiation. Okay, this is called an appeal to authority. So here's the gambit. It looks like you're negotiating in good faith. Okay, the person you're negotiating with acts like they're negotiating in good faith, but then they say, okay, now I just need to run this by my manager. It's, you know, it's a formality, and then we're all set. The manager comes in, or the authority comes in, and they want to renegotiate. What can you do? And this is, I've had this happen to me. It's really annoying. What can you do? Well, one thing you can do is try to confirm the authority at the start. So when you meet the happy salesman and he wants to start talking terms, say, who has to approve this deal? Can you make a deal right now? Or is whatever we're doing going to be subject to further review, right? Confirm that the person you're working with has the authority to do what they want. If they don't, maybe you're not talking to the right person. Why am I spending time with this person rather than the person who can make a deal? And if someone says, yes, they have the authority to do this, and later tries to do the appeal to authority, you kind of caught them now flat-footed. You can consider the prior negotiation void and start again, or walk away. If you've ever bought a house, or maybe if you've ever done a tour for the timeshares, you'll notice that one of the things that the timeshare guys will do is they'll first insist that both the husband and wife attend the meeting. That's to avoid you, it's to deprive you of the ability to seek an appeal to authority, right? They want to make sure before they give you the freebies, before they do stuff, they want to make sure that you have the authority, you have everything you need to make a decision. They're trying to take away your appeal to authority. Okay, so appeal to authority, by the way, this is one I will use. If someone's putting time pressure on me, trying to get me to make a decision, I'm quite inclined to say, you know, this sounds like a really good deal, but I need to discuss it with my wife. So an appeal to authority is not an evil tactic, but it can be used in unethical ways. So there's our first gambit, and now we're going to do our first detour. There's a couple of points that I want to cover before we go any farther. 2 key ideas in negotiating. The first is, I mentioned before, you might want to walk away from the discussion. A very important and sometimes unpleasant truth is if you can't walk away, you're not negotiating. You're discussing the terms of your surrender. So I try to, whenever possible, walk into a negotiation, giving myself permission to walk away. I think that's very important. Otherwise, it's very easy to be abused by the process. The other thing, and this is, if you're a poker player, you're familiar with this, you really have to kind of set your emotions aside. The idea behind a negotiation is to leave with what you want. And so if someone is rude to you or they apply some of these gambits, you may choose to ignore their behavior if the deal is attractive. Separate those two things out. And that can be hard. About 30 years ago, my wife totaled her car. And so we had to get a new car. We're a two-car family, and we were both working and shuttling kids around. So we did a little homework. We figured out what car we wanted. We figured out what it cost, what the markup was, went to the dealer, and they did the appeal to authority. I was younger and dumber. And so we had made a deal, and the sales guy came in, and the sales manager came in, threw the other guy under the bus. But I recognized what they were doing, and I was really grumpy because we had made a deal, and then they unwound it. I said, that's fine. I'm leaving. I walked out. And I was grumpy. I felt like I'd wasted the whole day. And as we're driving away, my phone rings, my cell phone rings, and they said, okay, well, we'll accept the deal. Well, we'll accept the deal that you had, which made me madder. It's like, why are we doing this stupid game? I understand that they're trying to maximize their profit, but I was really grumpy. And I had to decide, my wife and I had to decide, appeal to authority again. We had to decide, look, screw those guys. They're trying to take advantage of us. It's offensive. Or do we want to give them our business? Or do I want to waste another day? Because there's only a couple of places in town where I'm going to get this car. I'm not going to get a heck of a lot better deal. So I went back and we got the car. And it grated on me, but it was basically the outcome that I needed. It was the outcome I needed. I needed to get the car. So to the extent you can, and it's not always easy, set your emotions aside. Remember, the goal is, did you get what you wanted out of the negotiation? And it's okay if you have your feelings hurt, and you can always walk away, but don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Let's move on to Gambit 2. You make an offer, and the response is a gasp or a exhale of breath. This is called flinching, okay? This is called flinching. And the idea behind flinching is that humans are social animals, and we will respond to nonverbal cues. So flinching really kind of denigrates your offer. It makes it sound like you were foolish for thinking that, trying to shame you, basically, okay? And what they're doing is, because we're social animals, we'll pick up those cues. And the idea is to start trying to lower your expectations so that you're not going to negotiate as effectively, okay? What they're trying to do is knock you off your plan. And that implies that you have a plan, and that's a little beyond the scope of this talk. Basically, we want to go into a negotiation understanding what the value is and what our limits are, okay? But the idea is, idea behind flinching is to knock you off your game. So what's a good counter? Depending on who you're working with, you can just call them out. Oh, that was a great flinch. Where did you learn that? Were you a drama student? Or you can ignore the behavior and stick to your plan. But just recognize, you'll see this, right? You make someone an offer and they just like, you weren't serious, right? What about Gambit 3? What's going on in this picture? You think does this look like a negotiation to you? You know, not all bullies become muggers. Some of them become negotiators. What you're seeing here looks to me like intimidation. And I have absolutely seen this in negotiations, right? Someone attacking your ethics or intelligence for not agreeing to a deal. You know, the flinch is kind of passive. But intimidation is really aggressive. So I can't believe you're wasting my time like this. You said you were prepared to buy. You're just window shopping. You probably can't even afford this. Okay? And the idea is to put you on the defensive. You know, when we're attacked, our primal instinct is to fight, flight, or freeze. Right? We got to get past our instincts and we got to keep ourselves safe. If you feel like someone's trying to intimidate you, I'm a huge fan of just walking away. And if we can't walk away, the other thing you can do is just call them on their behavior. Call them on their behavior. Just tell them, I expect to be treated civilly. And if you can't, we don't have anything to talk about here. The important thing is to realize if someone's trying to intimidate you. Catch a breath. Think about this. Try not to let your emotions drive. And I absolutely agree, or I'll concur that this is way easier said than done. Recognize the tactic, realize you have options. Try not to let your emotions get the best of you. Because let's agree, bullies are jerks, okay? Our next gambit, does this sound familiar? We are an empathetic species. If you sit down next to a 2-year-old and look sad, a 2-year-old will try to comfort you. Okay, that's their humanity showing. There are absolutely people in the world that are hurting. And I, for one, would generally rather be suckered a little bit than be cold to someone that really was hurting. There's also people that believe all is fair in love, war, and negotiating. And they believe that telling you tall tales to improve their position is fair ball. This is called an appeal to sympathy or an appeal to emotion. Now, the appeal to sympathy is the way that we usually think of it. You know, mom is sick and that's why I'm selling the car. And the idea is that you encourage people to give you a better deal because they're feeling sorry for you. There's another aspect of this. If you have ever been distracted by someone of the opposite sex flirting with you and maybe made a bad decision because they were flattering you, that's the appeal to emotion. I have to confess that when I was 19, I bought a pair of really uncomfortable boots for way more than I probably should have spent at the time because the nice young lady that was selling the boots was flattering and charming. The key idea here is we want to try to keep some emotional distance. So let's take another little detour, okay? The previous 3 gambits, flinching, intimidation, and the appeal to emotion, all rely on provoking a response from you that confuses you or weakens your motives, weakens your resolve, okay? Theatrics are intended to throw you off your game. If you've ever been so distracted by something that someone said or another player's remarks or behavior and you misplayed your hand, you fell into that trap. I play poker with some really good poker players. I can usually go to Vegas and play poker I can play poker for about $25 an hour. I take the tourist money, hold it briefly, and pass it on to the pros. And I play poker with some guys that play poker way better than me. Let me tell you about 2 of them. One of them worked his way through college, going to the University of Nevada in Reno, playing poker on the side. That's what he paid for his college. He is the second best poker player I know. The best poker player I know knows how to push the first guy's buttons. And in poker language, it's called getting him to go on tilt, where he stops making good decisions. He starts looking for revenge or looking to get caught up, which is the last thing you want to do when you're playing poker. But the #1 poker player knows exactly how to push his buttons, and that's why he wins. So, quick reminders. Some people are going to be ferocious game players, love to win. Some people are jerks, and they're going to cheat to win. And some people are going to mislead you with their behavior or with what they tell you to try to gain an advantage. An important idea in negotiating is try to not be distracted by other people's behavior. Let's move on to Gambit number 5. I was about 10 years old when Apollo landed on the moon. I think it's one of the coolest things that's happened in my lifetime. At the California State Fair about 1972, NASA was touring around with a moon rock. It's like this big. And they had it in this secured enclosure. You could actually touch this moon rock. It was amazing. And I am 99.9999999% sure that they really did go to the moon. All compelling evidence says that they went to the moon. But have you ever heard any of these? Many people say they faked the moon landing. I've heard they faked the moon landing. A lot of people say they faked the moon landing. You know what all three of these have in common? They're all true. It is true that many smart people say they faked the moon landing. It is true that I've heard that they faked the moon landing. And it's true that a lot of people say they faked the moon landing, depending on how you count a lot. These are examples of using opinions as fact. They're weasel words. They didn't say the moon landing didn't happen. What they said is, a lot of people are saying the moon landing didn't happen, which, well, it's weasel words. It's true, define a lot. But this is a way that some people can try to maintain a shred of decency or a thin veil of, they didn't lie to you. They just expressed opinions as facts. And some people will say things to bolster their case that definitely are not true. They're shading the truth, or they're using weasel words to walk around and say they didn't quite lie to you. Teenagers are great at this, by the way. What's our counter? Counter here is we want to listen carefully for weasel words. Did they just make an assertion that can be confirmed? What is this? Is it a valid assertion? You know, a lot of people said the moon was made out of cream cheese. That doesn't make it true. If we're negotiating for something non-trivial, we certainly want to check any important facts before we finalize an agreement. If we're not in a position to confirm the facts before the agreement, we might want to make the agreement contingent on confirming any facts that have been alleged, right? So using opinions as fact, nasty, nasty practice. People do it all the time. You can probably think of some famous people that do this. Politicians do this all the time. We want to listen for the weasel words. And before we buy this, we want to check the facts. Now, here's one that you're all familiar with. This offer expires at midnight. Act now. People are waiting. The first 100 callers are going to get an extra special deal, right? This one's a classic. I actually was going to not include this here, but one of my consulting gigs about 20 years ago helped, well, it basically weighed in on a $100 million deal where my client had spent $100 million because the software vendor said, well, this deal expires at the end of the quarter because we got to make quota. So apparently people still do fall for this. How do you defend against it? Well, this is called a time pressure gambit. We try to establish time constraints that reduce the other person's ability to do research or to think, right? I can only offer this discount till Friday because, you know, it's the end of the quarter. My manager's trying to make quota. On Monday, the price is going to go up 10%. Well, 10%, I better jump on this. It's like, well, how much is the markup? You know, check the validity of the claim when you hear this. You might conditionally accept the offer after you've had a chance to do research. Or you could say, well, I guess I'm going to have to pass. I could never get the committee to approve this before next week. By the way, what did I just do there? I just used an appeal to authority as a stalling tactic. I'm a huge fan of the appeal to authority as a chance to buy myself a little bit of time to think, to get more information, or just to move on, get out of the situation that I'm currently in. Our next gambit is called nibbling. Okay, nibbling. Nibbling is you think the deal is done and someone wants just one more thing, just one more thing. So your opponent thinks you've reached a deal, and the negotiation is over, your guard is down. You start adding small, inconsequential requests, little things to get just a little bit more out of the negotiation. It might sound like this. Okay, so we've agreed to the price to the truck. I'll come tomorrow with the cashier's check for the full amount, and I'll pick up the keys. Of course, you'll fill the tank and wash it before then, right? And what they're trying to do is you think the negotiation is over, so you've let your guard down, and now they're trying to get just a little more out of you. Little kids are like this. Little kids are natural negotiators. Any of you are parents are going to recognize this. Oh, yeah, can we stay up 5 more minutes and then read this book? And then I need a glass of water. So the key idea here when someone starts nibbling is you need to be clear. They're reopening the negotiation. And that means that you can make a counter offer. Okay. Counter offers in this context are absolutely fair. All right. So our next gambit. You're going to have to do better than that. So here's how this works. Someone makes you an offer, or you make someone an offer, and they look at you, maybe they flinch. You say, well, you're going to have to do better than that. And then they're silent. They're silent. And what they're trying to do is get you to negotiate against yourself. After the offer is presented, they say, you're going to have to do better than that, and then silence. And that silence can go on for a long time. If you see a couple of really good negotiators engaged in this, the silence can go on for minutes. They both know what's going on. No one wants to be the next one to speak. The key idea here is you don't want to negotiate against yourself. You want to knock the ball back into the other person's court. If someone engages you with the vice, what you want to say, well, you're going to have to do better than that. Well, how much better? Try to get them to make the next move. If you offered them $10 for the thing and they say you're going to have to do better, you want to ask a question. You don't want to double your offer. You're negotiating against yourself. So what I want to do now is bring this back into a project management context. I'm an okay negotiator. Because I've studied negotiation, I feel a little more confident. But early in my career as a project manager, I was a fair negotiator, even as an uneducated rookie, because project managers are used to having to make trade-offs amongst schedule, scope, and resources, right? So what the key idea here is if we're managing a project and someone says, well, we need to find a way to pull this schedule in. Don't say yes. There's going to be a trade-off. And so we're looking for those trade-offs. I always look at this project management triangle. And if you want to optimize one side of the triangle, I look for relief on the other two. So if someone wants to pull a schedule in, I'm going to say, okay, are there additional resources that we can effectively put on this problem? Sometimes you can throw bodies at a problem, digging a ditch. Sometimes you can't. Painting a picture or writing a book, right? So are there effective ways that we could throw resources at this problem, money, people, equipment? Are there any features or functions that we could delay to a subsequent release? If we want to optimize schedule, we look for trade-offs amongst resources and scope. Well, what if we need to find a way to do a project cheaper? Well, then the question is there less we could do? Can we modify scope? Or can we extend this? Some things, if we are willing to extend them, we can do them less expensively. Well, hey, can we add this functionality, right? Scope creep. You're all familiar with scope creep, my project management friends. Can we add this functionality? Well, hang on. Sounds like we're having a negotiation. If we add this functionality, let's talk about the consequences to schedule and resources, right? So our whole change management process on a project is a way of managing and bringing negotiation so that we put it out on the table. And think about what's the bad effect if someone says, hey, can you do this one extra thing, right? Let's like that nibbling. We've got an agreement about what it's going to cost. We got an agreement about how long it's going to take. And someone says, oh, but I need this one extra thing. They're nibbling. And if that's not what we agreed to, then we want to ask the question, are we reopening the negotiation about time and resources? So what I want to do next is review the 8 gambits that we talked about, and the counters. Okay, so we started talking about the appeal to authority, where someone tries to negotiate with you in good faith. By the way, if you want to a summary of this whole talk, the next 2 slides are a really good summary. The appeal to authority is when someone you're working with, someone you're negotiating with, seems to be acting in good faith, and then when we have an agreement, they say, okay, all I have to do is get this approved by the committee or get it approved by my manager, and we're done. And that authority comes in, and first there's a delay, and second, the authority comes in and tries to renegotiate the deal, starting with where the last conversation ended. And your counter to that is confirm that the person you're working with has the authority at the start. Alternatively, if someone tries to reopen the negotiation, recognize they're reopening the negotiation and start again, start from scratch. The second gambit we talked about was theatrics or flinching. That's where you make an offer and someone gets a sad or excited or stunned look on their face, a disgusted look on their face, and they're sending you nonverbal cues that what you've done is insufficient and you should be embarrassed. And they're trying to, that's a communication tool to change how you're feeling and trying to get you to feel bad and kind of knock you off your game. And a key idea there is we want to try to ignore those behaviors, just recognize them as a gambit, focus on facts. We talked about intimidation, and you'll see this, a high pressure situation. It's surprising how some people will try to intimidate you. I think one of the things you can always do is walk away. Since I don't want to be treated like this and walk away. The other thing you can do is just call people out. It's like, I expect to be treated with courtesy and respect. This is unacceptable. Do you want to negotiate, or are we finished here? The appeal to sympathy or emotion. This is the sad tale or the marketing rep that flirts with you and tries to tell you how special you are and how smart you are, trying to get you to lower your guard, to let your emotions kind of overwhelm your rationality and reason in the conversation. And what you really want to do is keep your distance and keep your emotions in check. Sometimes it's helpful to go into a negotiation with a partner and just have them, their only purpose is to kind of nudge you if they feel like there's been an appeal to emotion, to kind of, so that you can be observant and recognize that. Using opinions as fact, that's a common manipulative behavior, and you hear this from politicians, right? People are saying, a lot of people say, I've heard that. None of these are verifiable, right? And so what we want to do here is check facts. If we have to make an agreement based on based on assertions, remember, they could be outright lies. We might want to make the agreement contingent on confirmation. What would that look like? Yeah, I just had the house inspected. Great, I will approve this contingent on you providing me with that inspection, right? And that the inspection matches what you've told me. Time pressure, we've all seen this. Most of us have used this, right? Okay, boys, 5 more minutes and Nintendo gets turned off. What you want to do if someone's putting time pressure on you, trying to get you to make a deal faster than you're willing to go, is check the validity. Check the validity. For most business projects, a week is not going to make a huge difference. Now, there are some contexts where time is absolutely of the essence. If you run a fishing boat and you have a boat full of fish, the value of those fish drops every hour after you get into port. So someone telling you, I'm going to be back to you in 3 days with a decision, no, that's not going to work. Make the decision now, because I got to get these fish sold while they're still valuable to me. Nibbling. Nibbling is when people are coming at you after you think the negotiation's over and they're trying to add things, right? I think one of the examples that I've heard is you agree to have your child's going on their first solo vacation. They basically twist your arm and get you to agree to fund the trip. And then after you've agreed to that, they say, well, you're not going to make me go with this ratty old luggage, are you? Right? Trying to add more into the negotiation. Recognize it's an opportunity to renegotiate. From a project management perspective, what we're talking about here is change management. And last is the vice. The vice. This is one you can experiment with, right? You're going to have to do better than that. Someone makes an offer, you don't make a counter offer. You just say you're going to have to do better than that. See if you can get them to start negotiating against themselves. If someone tries this on you, the good counter is exactly how much better? What did you have in mind, right? Try to knock the ball back into their court. You know, negotiations like a tennis game. Things are going back and forth and back and forth. You can keep the ball on their side and get them to do all the work, negotiate against themselves. You have arrived. You have become the Zen master of negotiation. Finally, before we get to questions, I want to remind you of a couple of key ideas that we brought up here. First one is, if you can't walk away, you're not negotiating. You're negotiating the terms of your surrender. That's a really good one to keep in mind. And sometimes you may not have latitude. You're at a disadvantage. Recognize that. Try not to be distracted by other people's behavior. It's hard. We're social species. We pick up on nonverbal cues and verbal cues, and we want to be responsive. We want to be liked. We want to maintain. We want to build relationships. That's a way to manipulate people if you're not careful. So try not to be distracted. When you're in negotiating mode, recognize that and try not to be distracted by other people's behavior. Like a poker game, when you're in a negotiation, it helps to be focused on who walks away with the most chips wins the game, right? It's not about, well, I maintained my honor, but I didn't win the most chips. Or, you know, that guy really made me grumpy, so I lost a bunch of money. I showed him. The outcome really is going to decide. The outcome of the negotiation is really going to decide who won and who lost. You get to decide, did you win? Did you get something you wanted for the right value? I think the thing that a lot of people forget is the point we made earlier, that it's your relationship, whether your relationship strengthened or weakened, built or destroyed. That's an outcome of a negotiation that is important to keep in mind. If you're in a strange city at a weekend fair and negotiating for some trinket, you're never going to see those people again. That the relationship is not really at stake. Make an offer if you're happy to buy it. If you're not happy with how things are, walk away. But there's no relationship there. What people forget is when we're negotiating with family members, associates, business partners, relationship is there. Your relationship in town, your relationship or your reputation is an important thing that you want to maintain. I would suggest that you look for a win-win outcome. Life is short. I don't want to take advantage of people. I don't want to be taken advantage of. And I think a win-win outcome is ideal. And last, just because we're all humans, try not to be a jerk. Try not to take advantage of other people. Go ahead and negotiate hard, but I would suggest negotiate fairly. And it's helpful to be knowledgeable about negotiation. Even if you don't negotiate often, in fact, maybe particularly if you don't negotiate often, so that you're not a rube who gets taken advantage of every time you have to buy a new car or buy a house. Think of this. If learning about negotiation, a little more about negotiation, just saved you 1 or 2% on a transaction. If you're buying a $500,000 house, 1 or 2% is what, about 10 grand? I wanted to save a bunch of time to answer questions that you might have about negotiation, about anything that we've talked about or other negotiating positions. So let's dive in with the Q&A. What kind of questions do you have about this talk, about specific circumstances? What questions do you have that I can help you with?
Oh, do you want to talk about these book recommendations first, Payson, before I move on?
Absolutely. I would recommend all 4 of these books. Getting to Yes and New Negotiating Edge are probably 2 of the best negotiating books out there because they talk about strategies to avoid being taken advantage of while trying to get a win-win. Never Split the Difference is the one that's written by a hostage negotiator. I think it's FBI hostage negotiator. Very interesting book. And he's talking about one-off transactions with people that have hostages. So he's got some really interesting insights. Secrets of Power Negotiating is a dark side book. I think it's absolutely worth reading. It's the kind of book that gets used to train salespeople, train those guys at the car dealership. And it's got useful insights, and it will help you understand the way some other people are playing the game. And it also talks about counters and the gambits and counters in that book. And there's my email address. If you have any questions that you don't want to post in chat, you're welcome to ping me with an email. Happy to answer any questions that you have. Back to you, Susan.
Oh, can one of these win-wins be used with people who don't react well to stress and are yelling at you? That's a good question.
Yeah, I think as soon as someone's yelling at you, we've got a separate problem. And nobody likes being yelled at. I think that if you find you're working with someone who's getting really agitated, maybe the best thing to do is call a timeout. That's an old facilitator's trick. If someone's getting really agitated, you say, look, you're obviously upset. Let's take a timeout. Maybe we can make some time over coffee a little bit later to continue this conversation. You absolutely can have win-win conversations with people who are agitated or don't respond well to stress. But if they're becoming overly emotional or hostile, the question is this the time to have that conversation? Really emotional people are not bringing their best. That's why some negotiators will try to knock you off balance. There's a famous story of Yasser Arafat was apparently a very good negotiator. And he was from Palestine, and it's very dry desert region. And so apparently one of his tactics was to get everybody around the negotiating table, and there were water jugs all up and down the table, and then he'd stall the negotiation. And he would sip water, but he didn't drink a lot of water. He let everybody at the table drink water, and he drew things out. And apparently the protocol was, if they didn't call a break, it was considered impolite to leave the table. So he let people's bladder capacity put stress on them so that he could get better terms in a negotiation, because they needed to pee and he didn't. There's a million ways that people try to knock you off your game, make you late, like you show up for a negotiation and they make you wait. So you're getting frustrated, you're getting anxious, you're getting off your game. So yes, absolutely, you can have a win-win conversation, but only if the other person is really going to play fairly with you. If they're being hostile, I'd call a timeout or walk away.
A special thanks to Payson for presenting with us today. Always a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for showing up.